Alright, so this is our fourth background guides training video. And this one's about logical flow. It's sort of this concept that I've sort of nudged towards in some of the videos, and so I wanted to be specific on what that means and what that entails. So what is logical flow? What is flow? And at its most basic level, just the order that the concepts are presented. It's really important because remember, you're trying to teach the delegates the topic, because we don't it would be silly for us to assume that the delegates are coming in experts on the topic. So that's what we need to do in our background guide, is to teach them. So it's in our flow, it's sort of like a template. And I'll go through this. There's like a checklist and a template that you can follow that I think works well. In this little diagram, this is from some Korean university, but I think I liked it. This is for scientific articles, but it generally follows what we would see: introduction, sort of methods or history, results, like what you want your committee to do, discussion, so like the conflicts. That's very similar. And so good logical flow is sort of like a funnel of specificity. So you're starting out here, and you're sort of just not too specific. You're sort of discussing the topic generally, and then as you go deeper and deeper, you're starting to discuss the history. You're starting to really get into like what the UN has done, what other organizations have done, who are the key conflicts, who are the key countries involved. And at the end, you've really gotten very specific. You've very narrowed in on that topic, and the delegate should feel like they've learned everything from up here to here. And so the steps in making a good logical flow starts with the introduction. And confusingly, I know that introduction is a required section, but I mean introduction in this way, in this manner, when I say this, could be multiple sections long, not just that one required section. And that's in the introduction, you're really explaining where and why. So like, also when is sort of in the where, like what geographic region, or what markets, how briefly mention how long this has existed for, go in how it works, and then history is where you sort of explain the context. So like, how did it start, like specifically, what motivated it, how was it evolved over time, and how has international action evolved over time. And then you sort of want to discuss then the current landscape, what's currently happening, and that's really where you get into your topic, is in this third, like the landscape, I want to say, because that's like, this is where we are now, and this is what our committee is going to then try to act on, which is in that fourth section, that task section, task, course of action, whatever you want to call it. And in that section, you should also sort of reference past action, so delegates aren't repeating themselves or repeating past action. We don't want that to happen. And as a specimen example, I'm using my outline that I finished writing for my background guide. My paper is on the voluntary carbon market, and its economic implications. And so, as you can see, I'm starting with an introduction, and I'm outlining the types of markets. Then I'm sort of outlining the key terms. I know in the Gatorman background guide, they sort of had it at the end. I sort of want to just get it out of the way so delegates aren't so confused as they start reading. And it's an easy place to reference. And then, as you can see, I get into the history. These sections here are sort of like the context, sort of providing the history of the voluntary carbon marketplace, and then explaining how it works. So like history and then the context. And then I'm sort of getting into the landscape here, which is the concerns. What are some current concerns that organizations have identified? And that framing is important, not saying that the UN has not determined that there is, but organizations like the Integrity Council and the VCMII have sort of identified problems. And so this is where I would summarize these concerns. And then the current governance, what has currently been done. And as you can see, like, it's already rich. And as you do research on your topic, you will see that there probably is already a rich system of international action. And that goes to show that sometimes what we come up with in theory doesn't always work out in practice. And so it's really important that we introduce these past actions so that we can sort of learn from our mistakes. And then at the end, I get into that the potential courses of action. Again, it's that neutral framing. These are potential solutions that the delegates. I'm not saying what they have to do. And as you can see, I'm mentioning both. Either the UN does nothing, they'll let the market self-regulate, uh, which is what's happening right now, or they'll create some UN oversight mechanisms. I want to invite both, and I preface it all with reminding the delegates of ECOFIN's jurisdiction, what specifically ECOFIN can do, because ECOFIN has never heard a topic on the voluntary carbon marketplace before. So it's really important that the delegates, they first need to decide, is it ECOFIN's role, and then if it is ECOFIN's role, then let's see what they should do. And then the questions to consider, the blocks, country list, that stuff's not on here, but it's there. One thing that I did want to point out is I mentioned in my introduction the voluntary carbon marketplace, and I sort of briefly explained how that works, and then the cap and trade system. So the cap and trade, or the regulatory carbon marketplace, is a type of carbon marketplace, but it's not the one that my committee is focusing on. So when you're doing your introduction, it might help to mention related topics and then say that we're not going to be focusing on those, to remind delegates that your committee is going to be very focused on one issue. A lot of poorly managed conferences will have these topics that are too broad, and so really this is our way of addressing that and correcting for that, is by reminding delegates what we're not doing, because often that is just as beneficial or even more beneficial than telling them what we are doing. So the things you're going to want to watch out for when you're sort of structuring your outline and your background guide, in your historical context, you should always ask yourself, so what? Because oftentimes the history is very long, it's very convoluted, and it's not always all relevant to the topic, to like your specific problem. And so just ask yourself, so what? When you're writing up something or you're including a section in your outline, be like, and what merit does this give to the delegate? How will this help them in debate? And if you can't get a good answer, perhaps, yeah, maybe the section's interesting, but perhaps it doesn't really need to be included. You're going to want to ensure the historical context comes to the present day or is an appropriate transition. So what I mean by that is, like, cover it until now. Like, don't stop like at some random point in history and then jump to now, because that jump can sort of feel abrupt. And so you're going to want to pace it, and you're going to want to try to go as much to the present or as to when your committee takes place as possible. You're going to want to avoid editorialization. Make sure that you're framing contentions with where they're coming from. So like, instead of just this is a problem, be like, this organization has identified this as a problem. That makes it so that it's not necessarily like the chair is endorsing it, because if you're not providing the source, and if you're not making it abundantly clear, it might sound that you're endorsing it when really you're trying to summarize the judgments from many organizations. And so just be mindful of that. And then also remember your scope and your mandate. So what is your committee able to do? And some conferences I've been to recently, this was sort of a problem, and it made me mad as a delegate, because I would put this effort into making these resolutions that I tried very hard to conform to the committee's mandate, and then other delegates would not do that, and then their stuff would pass, and I would be confused. And I would do well, obviously, but I don't want that to happen at PantherMUNC, because that's not a realistic situation. What would happen is that the committee would do it, and then they'd be like, we don't need to do it. And then in the resolution, they'd say, we delegate this to another body, instead of trying to force some unrelated topic into the jurisdiction of a committee. I bring to light my recent GatorMUN. I was in DISEC, so Disarmament and Security Council, and one of the resolutions that passed was primarily humanitarian, how to provide humanitarian aid. And that made me mad as a delegate, and I think it's because it was unclear in the background guide. It was very broad. So I say this because in your background guide, especially in that like landscape section or that solution section, hammer down what is the scope of the committee. What is it able to do as a UN body? And I created this checklist to sort of just when you're going through your sections, just to make sure that they follow the goals of the background guide. So For the introduction, I would ask yourself these 3 questions. Can a delegate with no prior experience understand the introduction? Does the introduction explain why without asserting some problem exists? And is the committee's mandate clearly scoped, and does it avoid telling what conclusions to reach? These last 2 really go into that no presupposition. Really, you are supposed to be providing facts, and the delegates come up with their own outcome. When you're writing up the history, you should ask yourself these 3 questions. Does every historical fact have a connection to the present debate? Does the history section end at or near the present? And can you ask so what after every paragraph? Again, that's summarizing what I had just said. And when you're writing out this landscape section, you might want to ask, are competing positions presented as arguments, not as facts? Does the writing avoid language that presupposes a problem exists, like the crisis or the failure of? That's very toned language that we don't really want to include. Are blocks defined by shared interests or positions rather than just geographic proximity? And really, you want to, again, I said this before, but you're going to want to motivate the reason why these blocks would have their own stance on the topic. And does the section explain why there is a contested issue and not already settled? Again, when you're doing that, when you're talking about past action, it's really important that you identify what worked and what didn't work, because like I'm saying this a lot, but like I just said, a topic might look solved if you look at the UN's action, but it doesn't always play out how we think it plays out. And so it's really important that you frame it in a way that's not like, and it's solved and there's nothing for us to do, because that's not correct. And then when you're thinking about sort of that task or courses of action section, you should ask yourself, do the questions directly correspond to identified tensions? Tensions that you identified in that landscape section. Could a delegate read the guiding questions without having read the rest of the guide and still understand them? And I star this one because if you say yes, then your background guide was not deep enough. Because if a delegate can just walk in and read these guiding questions, these questions that are supposed to be insightful, thought-provoking, critical thinking, and really deep on the topic, if they can just flick through your background guide and like produce a good answer to them, a backed answer to them, you didn't go deep enough in your guiding questions, or you didn't go deep enough in your landscape section. So that's something to rework. And then are the solutions debated approaches, not a menu? So don't just be like, yeah, you could do this, or you could do this. No, you really want to explain what makes solution A better than solution B, and what makes solution B better than solution A, and how does doing nothing a good solution, and how does doing nothing a not so good solution? Really, the pros and cons of each. Really exemplify the debate between them. And then overall, you're going to want to ask yourself, does each section logically require the one before it? Does the specificity follow a funnel-like structure? And is there a sentence where a delegate could reasonably ask, why are you telling me this? And I star this one again because if a delegate is able to ask, why are you telling me this? That's a poor sentence. That's a poor point to make. And unless then you could provide a great answer, don't include it. Or perhaps motivate it, provide some preface to that point, so then the delegate's not like, why is this? The flow leads into why that's an important point. And so when making your outline, look at this video as a reference, look at good background guides that you've seen before. PantherMUNC is typically very good. Follow the checklist that I have written up. I'll post in the Google Classroom, but it's also in this video. So when you're writing out your headings, which your outline should more or less be, think about what you're going to write underneath that. And so that'll help you see if each heading sort of flows together, because yeah, you could just, write out a bunch of headings, but you need to check in your head, okay, I'm thinking I'm going to say probably something like this in this section, and does that lead into this? Yes, okay, good. No, okay, maybe I'll move some stuff around. Make sure everything is framed neutrally. Both sides are presented. Remember, doing nothing is not a failure of a committee. And the outline doesn't need to be perfect. Your outline can differ from your background guide. Nobody's going to be like cross-referencing. Oh, they included this section on their outline, but on their back. No, we are doing quality control in the background guide, and we're making sure to submit an outline because we want to make sure that they're just on track to finish by the end of the summer. Okay, yeah, I'm just going through my list and making sure that I have it all. So thank you, and yeah, can't wait to see these outlines. Can't wait to see these background guides. Thank you.